views and opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Del Mar TV Foundation or the City of Del Mar.
Del Mar Hot Topics, where we discuss issues that are important to you. And now your host, Richard Levesque.
Welcome to Hot Topics. On October the 12th, I sat down with the 4 candidates for the Del Mar City Council race to try to probe a little more deeply than I could at the forum. Tonight, we'd like to share those interviews with you. Jerry, thank you for being here. You look so healthy. Are you sure you were not poorly at the forum? You just didn't want to be here?
Well, thank you, Richard. I've been accused of that, but I am feeling much better today, particularly. I went to see my doctor and got some very good news. And so I'm kind of on a high, so timing couldn't be better.
So your health isn't going to stop you serving the community?
I certainly hope not. The treatment plan that I got today indicated that because of the very good results I had at stage 1, that I could actually have this whole thing in remission within like 4 months.
That's such good news.
So we're I'm very happy to hear that.
That's such good news, Jerry. Yeah. That's great.
So, yeah, I have my fingers crossed.
That's great. Well, Jerry, the finances. In the forum, you had spoken about that the way to cut costs was basically to cap them. You are not suggesting any cuts, is that right?
You know, we've taken a careful look at staffing levels in the city. In fact, there was a consultant brought in when Richard Ernest was first elected, and he looked at the staffing levels and concluded that they were okay. A couple of years ago, additional questions were raised about how we compared with Solana Beach and Carmel. And we did a very close apples-to-apples analysis and determined that our staffing levels are appropriate. They're not excessive, as some people would suggest. And so I'm not convinced that we have overstaffing at the moment, but I recognize that if we're going to meet our financial objectives going forward, which was part of my plan, we're going to have to put some artificial constraints on there and limit the rate of increase.
And where would that be limited? Which area of the city would feel that? Lifeguards, streets, police?
That is yet to be determined. I think that when we look at where our budget is spent, you know, a very high percentage goes to the Sheriff's Department for traffic and for policing, the lifeguards, the fire department. I'm not aware of too many people that want less of those services. In fact, they're asking for more. So we're going to have to work with the county to see if we can't get better financial arrangements for what we pay them. And I think we're going to have to obviously do a lot of figuring out how we can, what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we can do it better. And that includes collaboration with adjacent cities. Solana Beach, obviously we've been doing some of that, and we need to find ways to do a lot more of that.
So you don't know where exactly you would limit the increase?
No. My plan basically indicates that we should adopt a policy of not permitting expenses to increase more than 4% a year, which is approximately inflation. And with revenues increasing at a faster rate, the spread between the revenues and expenses, according to my calculations and my plan, will provide what we need for the capital improvements that we're going to need over the next 20 years.
So you think we'll be able to afford the city sewer system being redone?
Yes.
You think you can do that?
Yes. We could do that today.
Okay.
Because that's an enterprise fund. The sewer and the water are enterprise funds, and the ratepayers pay for, you know, what the costs are there. So when we go out and redo the 21st pump station, that can be financed either by issuing of certificates of participation or from borrowing from other funds. But basically that goes into the rate structure, and the people then that are using those services will pay for those over the future periods.
So does that mean rate increases?
It could, yes, probably would.
Okay. Now, revitalization. It's interesting because the survey that spoke about Del Mar's satisfaction with their city life had 50%, slightly more than 50%, being unhappy with the bureaucratic red tape of the building process.
Right.
Any ideas how we can streamline that?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I served on council subcommittee for the last couple of years, and we looked at several specific issues that were then on the radar screen in the planning area and in the DRB area. And we've made some revisions and I think some improvements. But clearly there are a lot of people, I hear a lot of input that the process is still too slow, too complicated, takes too long. And so what I'm proposing is if I'm reelected, that I would volunteer to serve on a council subcommittee to go into great depth into 3 or 4 recent major projects to find out what really went right and what really went wrong and how we can streamline the process. Because at the end of the day, it's in the residents' interest to have this efficient, and the city wants it to be efficient. So if there are some problems, we need to sort out where they are, and I certainly am up to the task of trying to find out where those problems lie.
And how much of a priority is that for you to do that?
That's one of the highest priorities.
Good.
Yeah, finance would be number 1, traffic number 2, certainly that area I would probably list number 3 or 4.
Great. We'll come to traffic in a second. In terms
Okay.
of revitalization, the streamlining process you've talked about, downtown just doesn't change, and we've been talking about it for a while. Would you be open if zoning changes needed to happen, density increases needed to happen for revitalization to be viable? Would you be open for that?
I think it's essential for it to happen. I think we heard, a year or so ago, we had a presentation by David Winkler, well-known property owner and businessman in town, and he was telling us what needed to change in order to incent property owners and business owners to invest in downtown village businesses. And those are 2 areas that came out very clear, that we need to rethink ordinances on density, heights, and whatnot. So there are a number of those areas that, in my view, are fair game for reevaluation. Because ultimately, if there is to be major reinvestment in the community, the owners of those properties and the businesses are going to have to make those investments, and they're going to have to pencil out before they will be willing to do that. We can't direct that be done in the free enterprise system. So we have to figure out what needs to change and then change it.
But it's going to take a lot of courage to talk about increase in density in Del Mar.
Right?
I mean, is that something that you would want to do in terms of leading the revitalization, or?
I think it's an integral part of what is going to have to happen in our downtown business district. I'm not talking about increasing density in the residential areas, because I think that's been pretty well established by the community plan and all the ordinances that were adopted subsequent to that. But I think the downtown area needs to be reevaluated, and what the right changes are, I'm not sure at this point. It obviously needs a lot of study, but clearly that's one of the areas that the business owners tell us has to be looked at and hopefully modified in a positive way.
Yeah, that would be great to have a thriving downtown. Well, what about traffic? In the forum, you thought that the traffic problems were being solved. I think $35,000 is being spent on Crest.
I'm not sure that's the right number, but clearly there is an approval to spend some amount of funding. I think it was in the 20 to 35,000 to do this experiment, to put in the various new signs, to put in some new speed humps and the what do they call them? The
Islands.
Those islands. They have funny
traffic
names.
circles.
Traffic circles type things. And so yes, that's going forward. And I think that is an appropriate expenditure of city money. But that just really addresses the issues on Crest at the moment. It's kind of like the issues that we addressed on Stratford a year and a half or 2 years ago. And but what is going to have to happen on traffic is that we're going to have to take a look at the whole city. And this is going to be part of the update of the circulation plan of the community plan is scheduled for next year. And we're going to have to take a very careful look at what is going on with pass-through traffic on Camino del Mar.
But I mean, what concretely can be done? There's traffic,
Well,
and they'll go on Crest or Stratford. What else are we going to do?
Well, if we make it more efficient for them to stay on Camino del Mar,
What does that mean? What's
that means they will be able to get through town more quickly staying on Camino del Mar than if they go Crest or if they go Stratford or some other circuitous way.
So does that mean less stop signs?
That means, in my opinion, it probably should mean no stop signs, because I would think that synchronized traffic signals that would slow traffic down but move it through the city at a steady pace, not at a dangerous
Yes.
rate that would endanger pedestrians, in my way of thinking, is a better solution than to put as many stop signs as we have and just intentionally slow down and stop traffic. So
That's great, Jerry.
I know there are people in town that disagree with me on
That's
that,
right.
but that's where I come from.
That's great. I appreciate your directness there. What about the bridge at the south end of town? Is that part of the traffic plan?
Well, yes, indirectly, in that this was before I was on council, but part of the reason I understand for agreeing to buy the bridge for $1 from the city of San Diego was to make sure that we maintain control of that bridge, to ensure that we only had one lane of northbound traffic coming through, so that we didn't exacerbate the traffic flow on Camino del Mar.
Great.
So I think that was probably a wise decision, because we don't need more traffic coming northbound in the afternoon. And so bottling it up down further south rather than in the middle of our city, I still think is in our best interest. So
the idea is to bottle it up in the south and then get it through town quickly. What about the bluffs? Are you concerned at all about a train accident?
Well, a train accident is going to happen, depending on how long they continue to use the bluffs. And that's a concern. It's not an area that I've spent a whole lot of time researching, but I do hope that they find a way to get the trains off the bluff. But I recognize when you make a statement like that, you open up Pandora's box as to, what does that mean? Does that mean a tunnel under Camino del Mar? No, I don't think it means that at all. But I think it means having pressure brought to bear to move traffic east to the I-5 or the I-15 and get it out of Del Mar completely.
Why not a tunnel?
Well, the tunnel, I think, would be terribly disruptive. I know that that's something that the technical people have looked at, and I know it's technically feasible to do, but the disruption that it would cause to our community and to the business community in particular for a 4 or 5 year period would, I think, be devastating. So I would find it very difficult to support that option.
Now, I've talked to a local professor, UCSD geology, and he gave me some facts about the tunnel under San Diego State. It took 18 months. It wasn't that disruptive. It was done fairly well without disruption. Do you know for sure that it would be disruptive?
Well, I know what happened in Los Angeles, and it was very disruptive in Los Angeles. And the feedback I've gotten is that, one of the big problems would be the portals. What happens where the trains go into the tunnel and where they come out of the tunnel, the noise, the ventilation, and there are just lots and lots of issues there that, while they could probably technically drill a tunnel and do it, the consequences to the community, I think, would be very, very negative. And so I hope that's not where we end up.
Jerry, we have time for a couple of very quick questions. We get the same people coming to all the community kind of 2020 vision things.
Right.
How can we broaden community participation?
That's a tough issue. We had a discussion of that topic in a goal-setting session that the council had not too long ago, and we were told by our consultant that the bandwidth that's allocated to things like this is a very small bandwidth because people are very, very busy. They're taking kids to soccer games and they're doing everything else in the world. They're not paying attention to what's going on in the local community. But I think having more of the things that happen, like city council meetings and committee meetings, televised, like on Channel 66 here, and having more information available on our website are positive things to do.
Jerry, we have to finish. Thank you so much for being with us. You look fabulous, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Crystal, it's nice to have you here where I can talk to you rather than like the forum where I couldn't actually ask you specifically a question. Crystal, why do you want to do this again? You've been mayor twice. What's driving you? Are you a glutton for punishment?
Well, I have different answers for that question, but I absolutely love the city of Del Mar and the people that live here. And I guess I could say glibly that, well, I haven't met all of them yet, so I need to continue. I've told other people that I have this quirky genetic tendency toward liking this kind of thing, but it's truly a labor of love, and I think you get more out of public service than you put into it, and if you enjoy it, and which I do.
Crystal, finances. At the forum, the candidates spoke about needing $50 to $100 million over the next 20 years. We've recently heard that the value of Del Mar housing has gone down by 27%. How are we going to get the money if our tax base is sort of eroding?
Well, I think we have a very stable manager and council that is conservative. We have maintained balanced budgets and savings accounts the entire time that I've been on council. During when I first got elected in '98, we actually had a couple of years where we had surplus dollars, and we squirreled those away in different reserve accounts because, of course, we could see that rainy days might come. And so we've been blessed, I think, with, again, a council that takes a very serious attitude about managing the city's money, planning ahead, and saving ahead, and paying as we go. So I do think that we'll be able to access the money that we need because we are looking at a 20-year plan. And if you look at the money that we have saved over the years and the projects that we've done, we've been able to plan ahead and project what money we need and where we're going to get it from.
Why does Jerry say that he's going to cap costs by not having increases? You're saying we have plenty of money.
No, that's not what I'm saying, Richard. I absolutely agree with Councilmember Fennell's position paper that he recently put out about trying to put a cap on expenditures because revenues are growing, and I see revenues continuing to grow. I'm very optimistic about what's happening in our community right now, what's happening in the downtown area. So I think we're going to see those increased revenues. We are very competitive when it comes to going after grant funds, so we'll be able to access monies for special projects. But I absolutely think that we should try to cap our expenditures, as we've always done. Okay. You know, we're always looking for those opportunities, Richards, to reduce cost and increase efficiencies. And
where would you reduce costs? In which area? Lifeguards, roads?
Well, Jerry's plan doesn't require us to reduce services, and I concur with that. I don't think our residents want us to reduce services. I mean, I think this debate that we're having during this election cycle about finances, about revenues, about expenditures, that's a very healthy thing to do. Mm-hmm. But I have the benefit of having been a participant in at least 8 cycles of budget workshops and budget hearings, and so I have seen what we can do as a community. I've listened to the residents over those years, and I hear residents saying that they would like us to do more, not less. And
you think we have the money?
I think we can save the money. We can spend our money wisely. We can't do everything. No, we don't have that kind of money. We're a very small city with the smallest budget in the county.
So do you have a sense of where you would shift the money around, given that the tax base may decrease with prices going down?
Well, we were very aggressive after 9/11. Let me just give you an example of how certainly this council has reacted to adverse circumstances. 9/11 was catastrophic to our country, to our psyche. It dramatically affected Del Mar's revenue, our visitors. There weren't any. People weren't eating out. They weren't staying in our hotels. They weren't spending money in town. So the council immediately took action to reduce expenditures, to stop right there anything that we were spending money on that we didn't have to do, so that we could conserve cash. Like capital projects.
Got it.
So, we were able to do that because we have a process. We have quarterly reports to council about how our budget is going, are our revenues on track, our expenditures on track. So we were able to react to that quickly and conserve cash and reduce as many expenditures as possible. We have a very capable city manager, Richard, as well as a capable council. So,
of course,
when push comes to shove, we make the adjustments that we need to make. And we have a council policy in place where we maintain a minimum level of 10% of reserves and a maximum of 20.
Okay.
So at any given time, we have reserve cash, we have a revenue loss reserve, we have our equipment reserve is 100% funded. You know, we're very steady as you go.
Okay. How about revitalization? One of the things that the residents complained about in their general satisfaction with city life was the red tape process of getting through the design review. Any thoughts about how you can do better at that?
Well, I think I've been able to contribute much to the council because I came from 4 years on the design review board originally, including 3 years as chair. And Jerry Fennell and I have worked for the last several years on specific improvements to the process and trying to work with our fellow council members to diagnose where are there areas that we can improve.
And what did you come up with?
Well, we specifically tried to refine how view corridors are defined and what the view ordinance, the portion of the design review ordinance that preserves views, from which areas are views to be respected. It doesn't include views from bathrooms or bedrooms, but you know, we tried to focus in on where are the problem areas with the ordinance. We've also looked at what parts of the design review process could be subject to or eligible for administrative review. So not everything has to go through a full-blown process.
So do you have any plans in your next term should you be elected?
Well, we're continuing to work on that. In fact, I have talked with applicants who have recently been through the process, and as well as neighbors that have recently been through the process, to get feedback from them about what did you think went well and what are the areas where you think things could have gone differently and would have been better. So it's an ongoing process. Government never ends.
Now, when it comes to revitalization of downtown, if it seemed like the right idea to increase density, change the zoning, to make incentives, would you be for that?
Well, I have to listen to the community first. I mean, I don't make these decisions unilaterally.
But you don't have a visionary plan for how you would like to see it?
Well, I think we are working on plans, Richard. As you know, we recently, council agreed to change the way that we calculate the floor area ratio for particular lots, insofar as how driveways and other types of easements, how those affect the floor area calculation. So I think council is looking at trying to, again, solve problems that affect our ability to have development in the commercial district as well as development in the residential areas. So I'm open to making changes that make sense for the community, but I'm also very protective of the community, because the reason Del Mar is such a wonderful place, in my opinion, is because it does have restrictive zoning. And as a consequence, we have an incredibly desirable community. We have the highest property values per square foot of any city in the county.
Right.
Well, all property values are going down, except for other parts of the country. But again, I think you're speaking in generalities there, and but that doesn't take away from the fact that our property value is the highest per square foot in the county.
So as far as revitalization is concerned, you would be open to community input about that, but you're not sure which way to go yet.
Well, I'm not quite sure what you mean by your question, Richard, because we've been working on revitalization as long as I've been on council, and with a real energy for that over the last 6 years or so. And I'm very excited about where we are right now, because there is an energy in the community in general. There's many new families in town, many new residents with kids that are playing on the street and playing in the parks, and we have many more residents than ever before, I think, volunteering, especially on the Del Mar Village Association, which, as you know, is I think is very successful because it has residents working with property owners and with business owners to try to come up with new solutions and new ideas for the commercial district. So I think that's going exceptionally well.
So you're open to those new ideas?
Absolutely.
What about traffic? You had said in the forum that you had voted against the widening of I-5.
Yes.
How does that fit into your traffic plan?
Well, the I-5 is a part of the problem, certainly, as is 56. as is all the development around us. I think I also mentioned during the forum that, Carmel Valley, which at that time of approval was called North City West, was, as I recall, originally supposed to have about 10 or 12,000 houses. It has like 25,000. So of course, the traffic impacts from the development to the east of us and all around us can't help but affect what happens in our little city.
So what would you do within Del Mar?
Well, I think we're doing many things now already. We have a streetscape plan that was well vetted and put together in the 90s before I was on council, and we're implementing portions of that streetscape plan, which is Camino Del Mar, and we added Coast Boulevard about 4 or 5 years ago to the plan.
And what will that do for traffic?
Well, it narrows the lanes along Camino Del Mar and widens the sidewalks, so it continues our tradition of being a pedestrian-friendly and pedestrian-oriented community. So
you would slow traffic down through Del Mar?
Correct. It slows traffic by changing the design of Camino Del Mar. It maintains the 2 lanes in either direction on the main part of the commercial district, but it does narrow the roadway to, it's still a safe width, but it does visually change so that drivers slow down. We provide more safe spaces, as we've done at some of the intersections in town already, for pedestrians, safe crossings.
And would you keep the stop signs, or would you do anything with the traffic lights?
I do not favor traffic signals. I don't favor turning Camino Del Mar into an arterial, because I'm not in favor of promoting vehicles. We have enough cars in town. And the traffic on Camino Del Mar divides the west side of our community from the east. And if we're going to continue our commitment to pedestrian orientation, I think I don't want to speed traffic through town. I know some people are in favor of doing that, but I don't think that that's in keeping with our pedestrian orientation.
Okay, thank you, Crystal. What about leadership and community issues? You'd spoken about in the forum about how good it would be to get more people involved. Yes. And people had said 2020, were there enough people really involved in that vision? How can we get more people involved?
Well, I think you're helping by what you're doing. By, the Hot Topics certainly has, the programs that I've seen have taken on a number of community issues in an effort to inform the public. Not everyone can come down to the TV station to watch a council meeting or provide input. So I think it is very helpful to provide more information in as many different ways as we can. And I think the city's website has been very successful. We have more and more people signing up on our city website for notices of different meetings, to get notice when we're going to have a workshop on different issues. But it's a constant challenge, and it's one that we share with all other cities around the country.
Quick question. Public rights of way. Any feelings about that you can share with us?
Well, I think they're very important, again, to maintaining pedestrian access and pathways, to providing areas where children can use a pathway instead of using Crest Road or Camino Del Mar. There's a network of pathways around the community that many people aren't aware of that do provide that relief from traffic on our main streets.
Okay, and then a very quick question. Would you want the train tracks moved?
Oh, absolutely.
You want them moved?
That's already been decided, Richard. That
tunnel or no tunnel?
The tunnel is one of several alternatives that the state is looking at. I personally favor moving all freight to the East County, so that then we will have opportunities to move all of the commuter rail to I-5 or other locations.
Crystal, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
It's great to meet with you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Michael, this morning in the paper, there was a fuss about where you're actually living and are you eligible because you're living outside the city limits. Tell us about that.
That's actually very interesting. First of all, as far as I know, I'm eligible. What happened is that the home I've been living in for 15 years over here on Stratford, I was unable to stay there, and it came up rather suddenly. So I was looking around for a place. A friend of mine had offered that I could house sit for her up in Pine Needles, but then at the last minute she didn't have it ready. And another friend said, well, I have this RV in the RV camp there down by the Hilton Hotel, and you can stay there for a week while you wait for this house to get ready. So I ended up in this trailer park, and it's very interesting. It's actually owned by the fairgrounds, and it gives you a completely different perspective of this area and the people who come through there and live there, and of the fairgrounds itself, and the view of the Del Mar, from that. And you can stand in the middle of that valley and just imagine how it was before the freeway, before the fairgrounds, when it was just the San Diego River flowing to the sea.
So are you eligible? Are you you're going to move back into town?
Oh, I've already located and rented a place on 11th Street, which is a nice place. I'd looked at it before, but it was a little bit too steep for me. But then the market adjusted, and
great. So you're in the race.
I'm in the race.
In the forum, the candidates spoke about 50 to 100 millions for the city budget. You feel strongly that we need to do something about the financial situation. How are you going to cut costs?
Well, if you don't mind, I consider the issue and the problem of the deferred maintenance, the deferred capital improvements, the result of the way the council and the previous councils for the last 12 years have been managing the budget and managing the expenses of the city. I think I would agree completely with Laura DeMarco's approaches. I have always felt, I've long felt, that we're spending way too much on planning expenses because of the subjectivity of the planning process.
So you would cut planning?
I would change the planning process to make it more objective. I wouldn't do away with design review by any means. I would eliminate most of the causes of long, involved, expensive processes that for both the city and for the people who put the city through it. And
how would you do that concretely?
Well, actually, in my reading of the design review ordinances, they're fairly objective. And I would just make sure that the ordinances are observed objectively, and there aren't subjective decisions made by these semi-judicial bodies.
And how would that save money?
Would reduce the number of hearings, the number of planning staff required to do the arguments pro and a con. Simplifying a lot of things would reduce planning staff involvement.
How would you pay for your idea of storm water treatment, given that budgets are tight?
Yes, well, in fact, you asked earlier, why am I doing this? And it's for things, because of things like that. I am probably one of the few, if not the only person in this city who has had experience working with regional development groups and with regional governance and pulling together projects that required inspiring people in other communities to work together. I think that my approach would be just to say this is a priority for not only Del Mar, but for everyone who uses the beach, everyone who's in the water, for the entire coastline. We should not be emptying our streets into the ocean. That's a priority for us.
Michael, I'm sure many people would love that, but how can we pay for it? By just cutting or streamlining the planning process?
That is not how we pay for the sewer. But the way that is a regional problem, and it's one that we actually need to work with our regional neighbors to solve.
I see.
And I mean people in San Diego and Carmel Valley and in the Terrace area, as well as people in Solana Beach and elsewhere.
So there would be some assessment for that purpose?
Or some demand from the state and the federal government for funds to support keeping our water clean.
So you would do it through grants from the government?
And definitely. And I would also look at any way to raise public consciousness about it, to make it a demand of the people, not a demand of just Del Mar, but of everyone who cares about this ocean, who lives around here, that, yeah, we should be treating it and ourselves fairly.
Yeah, that would be very nice if that could be done.
It would take energy, it would take leadership, it would take being responsible for the well-being of more than just our little town, and communicating that.
Michael, in the forum, you spoke about the loss of the vitality of downtown. Besides the train station, what's changed? Not much seems to have changed. Where's the vitality that you see missing?
I think it's a spiritual loss in a way. And it's hard to say something like that and say, well, that you can solve by being on the city council, but you can. Del Mar, when I came here, was a very sweet place. Mm-hmm. And I know I meet you down on the beach a lot in the mornings, and that sweetness, the potential for sweetness is there, but it somehow disappeared within our community. And it has to do with the way people relate to each other, the way we talk about ourselves and our visitors, and it has to do with the way we honor things that are more important than money. Like the train situation, for instance. Well, it seems like a small thing, but the business owners that I've talked to tell to me that where they're marginal now, if the train station were still operating, they'd be profitable. Mm-hmm. And it's just that maybe 10% of the business that increases because people would come here as a destination for a day trip. That's not happening. The traffic and the parking causes too much frustration for people.
We'll hear your views on traffic in a moment. Do you think you're a good example? You're setting a good example in terms of changing the tone of the city, in terms of the sweetness?
It may not seem that way at city council sometimes. I get very frustrated. And yet, in terms of in the interpersonal relationships I have, I can't walk on the street here without having a very sweet and pleasant encounter. And once in a while, one that isn't so sweet.
So that would argue for the fact that it is a pretty sweet, spiritually sweet place. But yeah. You think you could add a certain something.
I think I could adjust the tone here so that we were much more user-friendly for each other.
So what creatively would you do with downtown specifically? I mean, would you increase density to have developers build a nicer downtown? Would you do rezoning?
You know, what's missing here is the kind of density that shopkeepers need to serve them with residential businesses. And the only solution to that, in fact, is increasing density. That, of course, is taboo. I mean, literally taboo. I am not sure, and I oppose the development that the council proposed for the Shore site and for the City Hall site, because I live here, and I don't want to have the additional density that's disturbing me. So that's not an easy issue. So the question is, how do you restore the vitality in Del Mar? Well, one thing would be to argue for the opening of the train station, have Amtrak and Coaster stop there again.
And potentially increase density. What about traffic? You had said that alternative ways to transport people should be considered. What exactly does that mean? Segways?
Segways are cool.
But how would you do that? What would you do with traffic in downtown Del Mar?
There's so many possibilities that we have missed, and there's so many opportunities that we have now. And yet, and what's been missing is some initiative to just say, well, let's try something and then stick to it and make it happen. For instance, there's no reason why there isn't a dedicated transit lane across that median in the Torrey Pines Road going up the hill to UCSD, so that one-way transit vehicles could make a quick trip back and forth to the La Jolla business campuses and to UCSD. That would eliminate some cars. There's no reason why there isn't some sort of a transit service that takes people from Del Mar over into the Carmel Valley area and back. We don't even have a way of using all this parking space in the fairgrounds by allowing people to leave their cars there if they want to come and visit the town. Mm-hmm. And so you can say, well, there's 100 different opportunities just locally. But my main problem is the fact that, or not my main problem, but the main problem I see with how the council has been operating is in its relationship with NCTD and SANDAG. And I have been intimately involved with transportation planning in the region because I did the high-speed ferry demonstration project, which required extensive study and presentations to the state, to SANDAG, to the city of Oceanside, the city of San Diego, the port. We had to go through all of the transportation network issues to show how a potential high-speed ferry could link San Diego and Los Angeles and
How
Santa
much
Barbara.
money was spent on that taxi project?
About $2.5 million.
And it didn't go anywhere.
It did. It proved we actually took an experimental boat, and by the time we were through 6 months into the project, we were turning away people at the docks. They loved it. It was we proved the feasibility of actually operating a passenger vessel in these seas.
Okay.
Now that's an issue because the nature of these seas is not typical for ferry operations. It requires a certain kind of boat. So.
Okay. Michael, generally the public are pretty satisfied with Del Mar life, except for the design review process and bureaucratic red tape. You had said earlier a little bit about that. If you were elected, what would you specifically do to make life easier?
Well, in the first
for
place,
builders, for people building a home.
In the first place, it's not my experience that people who have had to deal with the design review process are particularly happy about having to go through what they've gone through. And the fact that when they're at the end of the day, when they're through it, they can say, "Oh my God, that's over." Yeah, that's a relief, right? And they can express some satisfaction in that regard.
Well, 50% said they were unhappy with that.
50%.
59% expressed unhappiness.
Yeah. And now in terms of being happy with living life here in Del Mar, we are
But what would you do with the design review process?
Oh, the design review process, as I said, just needs to be made objective. And other people have talked about that. But the things that we're not doing that amaze me for a city of the kind of... I noticed, I read the statistics on the level of education in Del Mar and around here, and something like 70-some% of the people who live around us have higher college degrees.
Yeah.
And, you know, more, at least, you know, like a large percentage of them have master's degrees. Mm-hmm. And yet, what do we do culturally in Del Mar that represents that kind of interest? That's very little, really, when you compare it to other places, anyway.
Okay. Michael, what would you, there's talk about mansionization, and at the same time, there's talk about families not moving here because you can't build a big enough home. Can you give us an answer to that? What would you do about mansionization?
Richard, for the last 4 years, I've been taking care of my mom in that little house. Well, there's 2 little houses on that lot, and the house was more than she needed. And so I'm looking at what people need to protect themselves with compounds and say, well, that's nice, you know, if you can afford it and that's what you want to do. It kind of, to me, it's sort of isolating, but, you know, if you want to live in your own park.
You're okay with that?
I have no particular problem with it. That is not a reason, nor does it justify giving up our affordable rental housing in order to make it into high-end condominiums. However, see, it doesn't mean you don't have to stop. Stopping mansions doesn't increase the affordability of housing, and increasing affordability of housing doesn't stop mansions. It's nonsense.
Michael, thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Laura, thank you so much for being here tonight. I know you have a sick child, so I really appreciate you being here. You're a financial expert. Finance is sort of your expertise. Is that true?
Actually, I'm more of a business person. Investment management was the business I was in.
I see. During the forum, a lot of the candidates talked about the 50 to 100 million in future costs for the city of Del Mar.
Right.
And you had some strong feelings that you could cut those back a bit.
Right.
That we need to. How would we do that, Laura?
Actually,
concretely,
there were 2 issues. One was the current operating budget, particularly the general fund, and the other was the capital expenditures that we need to reserve for. And the expenses on that side are approximately $122 million, and we're counting about 57% of that being paid for by grants. Well, we have to come up with the remainder, and that is the big issue here in Del Mar, is how we're going to pay for that over the future. And if you look at this chart, which was handed out in the budget workshop, Long-Range Capital Financing General Fund, this was at the budget workshop in June, the City Council was provided with 3 scenarios. And those scenarios had a series of assumptions on the general fund side on revenue growth from a lot of different areas, and then also what expenditure growth was going to be, and then what we would have for capital projects. And if you looked at the current rate of spending and the current rate of and the current revenue rate, what happens is here we have fiscal year 2000. Here's fiscal year 2006, where we are right now. So it looks relatively healthy. But the problem is, at the current spending rate with the current expenditures we have, current revenue growth we have, by fiscal year 2014, it actually goes negative.
So, Laura, what would you do concretely? Thank you for that. I don't know if the viewers can see that.
Oh, sorry.
So that's all right. You can put that down.
Okay.
So what would you concretely do?
Well, what we
Where would you cut?
Okay. What we should do is cut 10% from the existing operating budget. That will generate about $1 million in revenue that we can use to properly reserve for these future capital expenditures, so this line doesn't drop so precipitously. And this is what we do in business. When you're having a forecast like this and you have these kind of reserves that you need to make to be accountable, what you need to do is actually do a 10% cut, and that's standard across the business environment. For example, you go to the department head and say, you figure it out, I'm giving you a mandate to cut 10%, go do it.
So would you cut salaries? Would you cut police? Would you cut lifeguard? Would you cut roads repairs? What precisely would you cut?
Well, we pay the city manager close to $200,000, including benefits. I think it's very responsible for us to go to the city manager and say, listen.
So you'd cut salaries?
It could be a combination of salaries and the like, but there's some things we just need to be smart about how we spend money. Like? For example, I got a lot of phone calls when the city came out with their quote-unquote satisfaction survey. Here's a city that claims it's running out of money, doesn't have enough money to operate, and that's the reason why Prop N they tried to pass 2 years ago. Yet we spent $20,000 for a quote-unquote satisfaction survey, where the first question that was asked is, are you satisfied with your quality of life as a resident of Del Mar? Now, in my business or any other business, like if I was with an American Express, the first question I would ask a customer of American Express is, are you satisfied with your quality of life? That is not a meaningful thing to ask because it's dependent on a bunch of things.
Gotcha.
The health of the person,
So you would cut across the board salaries. You would look for ways not to what you see as wasting money, like the survey and so on.
Right.
Now.
And then I also think we need to look at how we can manage things more efficiently. For example, in the planning department, compared to other cities our size, we are very overstaffed in planning.
So how would you do that with planning? Would you do it with design review, or what concretely would you do to fine-tune it?
Well, what we can concretely do is look at our staffing. That's number one.
What does that mean?
How
do you look at it?
The thing that we can do, which Carl Hilliard and Jerry Fennell have done in the past, is look at where we can merge services, like with the city of Solana Beach. So we did that with the fire department. We were able to have some savings, and it looks like what the city does is whenever someone leaves, they look at an opportunity to actually combine resources with Solana Beach to increase economies of scale. We need to be more strategic about it, not just opportunistically wait for people to leave and then say, oh, well, our head of computer services left, so let's look at merging with Solana Beach on sharing computer services. I think we can be smarter about how we do it.
Thank you. You were on the San Diego County Pension Board, and the pension board invested in the infamous hedge fund that lost $6 billion, Amaranth.
Yeah, Amaranth.
Amaranth. Okay. We practiced that, and I still get it wrong.
Okay.
Yeah, dyslexic. Tell me about that.
Okay. Well, I'm very proud of being on the pension board. It has a AA+ rating, which is actually higher than even the city of Del Mar. And since I've been on the board in May 2004, our valuation has actually grown by $2.7 billion. And
so you don't see that investment as a particularly bad investment?
Well, the thing is unfortunately, that investment didn't work out, but we have a lot of others that fortunately have done incredibly well.
Okay.
And so that's why you diversify, and that's why actually I'd love the city to diversify further its tax base and its client base. For example, one of the things we talked about in Hot Topics was that our largest customer on our water and sewer is the fairgrounds. They're 40% of our revenues on water and sewer. There's the possibility, a pretty good possibility, that the fairgrounds will switch their service because we don't have the capacity to San Alejo. Mm-hmm. And if that happens, all the remaining ratepayers will get hit with a large increase because we'll bear all the overhead costs. And that's one of the things when you talked about where would you cut. It's not even necessarily that we have to cut as much, it's just maximize what we've got. And if we can merge our small utility district, it's unfathomable to me that we have a utility district that we maintain with all the overhead associated with it. For a city of our size, we have 4,500 residents, we have 1,700 water and sewer hookups, and we have no economies of scale.
Okay.
And if we merge with San Alejo, it'll be environmentally much better because they actually do first world treatment, unlike San Diego, where we ship our sewage straight off the coast of Point Loma. And
so you would look for all these economies of scale that we don't have. You spoke at the forum about wanting to maintain the downtown as a charming resident-serving place. It's hard for people to make a business work downtown.
Right.
What concretely would you do to increase commerce? What specifically would you do?
Well, the thing that we could do first off is any development projects that come in, really encourage them and incentivize them to have underground parking. Because the overflow parking, because of the 90-minute parking zone in the central corridor, is having the power shoppers and the employees of these businesses park in all our residential streets.
How would we incentivize?
Like, for example, right now we have the old gas station lot, which is now a fence corral around it. There are plans on the board right now, and a subcommittee of the City Council has been appointed in residence to work with these developers for that particular project to actually have them have more retail-oriented space on the first floor, and also they have right now plans to put in 2 levels of underground parking, and I believe it ends up being about 75 spaces.
So would you look at increasing density or changing zoning, height limits, and so on? Would you be open to that?
Well, the thing is that obviously anything over 25,000 square feet has to be voted on by the voters. So it's really up to the public on how they want to see downtown Del Mar develop on high-intensity uses. So
you would be open to public input, but you wouldn't lead the way with increased density?
No. And another, again, about maximizing resources as well, is we have the City Hall site currently, which is a perfect topography to have underground parking. You could get 100 to 200 cars in there. And it's not like the gas station lot where you'd have to excavate.
So let's move into traffic then.
Yeah.
What is your vision of how we can deal with traffic? We have people going up Crest. We have an attempt to stop people going on Crest. What about downtown? What would you do? Would you take away stop signs, traffic lights? What would you do?
Well, what I wouldn't do is focus on the symptoms, which is what we're doing right now, is focusing on individual neighborhoods. What I would do is focus on Camino Del Mar, because that's the root cause of the entire problem. Because
what would you do?
I would have our traffic engineer look at solutions like were used in Bird Rock, and from what
was that?
They used a combination of synchronized lights and traffic circles. Mm-hmm. I think that would be very helpful, because what happens is every time someone comes to a stop sign, if they've waited 10 minutes to get there and go another couple of hundred feet, they are tempted to immediately dart off and try to figure out a way in our labyrinth of our neighborhoods to figure out how to bypass the Camino del Mar bottleneck.
So you would speed traffic through town?
I would smoothly move traffic through town. Obviously, we wouldn't want it speeding. But you know, Camino...
Increase revenue by giving them tickets. That's a joke.
Oh, that's not a joke. That's actually the plan. If you look at our city budget, we estimate this year that we're going to get $1 million from traffic fines and parking fines.
Do you like that? Do you think that's a good way to increase funds?
Well, the interesting thing about it, on one side we've got revitalization where we want people to come here and spend money. On the other side, if they spend 91 minutes in downtown Del Mar parking, they're going to immediately get a $35 parking ticket, and we've got very good enforcement to make sure that happens.
That's a great point, Laura. So what would you do?
I think we really have to look at how we balance the parking side and the fines with you know, this whole downtown revitalization, because you take someone who gets a fine in downtown Del Mar by having a lunch with the girls, a long lunch with the girls, and then go shopping, and then reward that person with a $35 parking fine. They're not likely to lunch here again and shop.
Right.
So
one quick question here, design review.
Yeah.
What would you do with that? People complained that that's a laborious process.
Well, I've been through the design review process.
What would you do?
I'm trying to think about that. One of the things I think that's really important is, and it's been improved right now, is what happens right now is there's a notice that goes out to the neighbors, and then the story polls go up, and
any quick thing you
there's
have?
a lot of there's nothing quick in solutions in Del Mar, but I think it would be really helpful to have more of a consortium of people who've recently used it. I know that they've been surveyed. If you look at that satisfaction survey that we spent $20,000 for, when they really got into the meat of it, there was one question devoted to people that had gone through development in the last couple of years, and their satisfaction level, and it was incredibly low.
Laura, thank you. That's all the time we have today, but thank you so much for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you for
I'm your host, Richard Levac, and thank you for watching Hot Topics. Don't forget to vote.